Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I'm joined here today by members of our education community and fellow legislators to announce the introduction of S44 and H809. Let me start with a simple truth. We do not need to dismantle Vermont's public education system to address the property tax crisis, and that is not what Vermonters asked for. Last year, the redistricting task force heard from more than 5,000 Vermonters, and their message was loud and clear. They are overwhelmingly opposed to forced redistricting, deeply concerned about top-down mandates, and worried about inequitable changes that strip communities of local voice. Vermonters want solutions, but they want solutions built with them, not imposed on them. Yet, Act 73 moves in exactly the opposite direction. It mandates widespread district mergers, imposes a new foundation formula, and centralizes decisions that belong in communities. And critically, there is not sufficient evidence that Act 73, as passed, will improve educational outcomes or save taxpayers any money. Meanwhile, Vermonters are rightly frustrated by rising property taxes, but they will not see meaningful property tax relief until we address the fundamental unfairness in our current system, where low and middle income Vermonters are paying a higher share of their income towards education than the wealthiest Vermonters. That is the real crisis, and it remains unaddressed. We also need to be honest about what is driving costs. We have a cost problem, not a spending problem. Inflation and costs outside of the control of school districts are driving budgets up. Health insurance costs alone are growing more than twice as fast as overall education spending and have more than doubled in the last 7 years. Meanwhile, when adjusted for inflation, education spending in Vermont has been essentially flat from 2005 to 2024. The narrative that runaway local school spending is the problem simply does not match the data. And finally, under Act 73, the closure of small schools becomes inevitable. We know what happens when a small school closes. Families leave, local jobs disappear, town centers weaken, and rural economies suffer. Small schools are not just educational institutions, they are the heart of so many Vermont communities. So today, we are calling on the legislature to take a different path. We have introduced legislation in the House and Senate to repeal the harmful aspects of Act 73, including forced mergers and the foundation formula, while maintaining the positive progress made, such as the second home property tax classification and reasonable restrictions on independent schools. And we are calling on the legislature to move forward with the evidence-based recommendations of the redistricting task force, regional cooperative service models, strategic voluntary mergers, and the development of comprehensive regional high schools. These are solutions built on evidence. And to my colleagues in the legislature, I want to be very clear. We are a separate and co-equal branch of government. The governor does not get to unilaterally mandate forced redistricting. That is not how Vermont's democracy works. 10 years ago, when Governor Scott took office, Vermont ranked among the top 5 states in the nation for educational outcomes, as he highlighted in his State of the State address. Any decline since then has occurred under his watch, under his administration, and the leadership of officials appointed by him at the AOE. That record does not build trust or demonstrate the leadership required to justify sweeping, top-down overhauls of our public education system. We can address the property tax crisis, we can strengthen public education, and we can do it without sacrificing local democracy, without harming rural communities, and without widespread disruption to our public education system at such a tenuous time in history. And from here, I'll pass the mic to Caitlin McLeod-Bluver, Vermont's 2025 Teacher of the Year.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy to be here. I've been a public school teacher for 15 years, and in my classroom we do a lot of challenging learning. When given a hard task, we spend time reading multiple sources, asking questions, interviewing stakeholders, listening to diverse perspectives, and synthesizing multiple perspectives. And we listen to the evidence. Where's your evidence? Where are your sources? How do you know that? I frequently ask students, and they often mock me. Our members of the redistricting task force did just this. They listened to community input, They reckon with the complexities of the task, and they listen to the evidence. Rather than pushing through with the assignment, they bravely propose an alternative solution. Sometimes in our class, the evidence doesn't always say what we think it will say. We often use sentence starters such as, I used to think, but then I learned, so now I think, to track our learning. But our learning is always guided by the facts. When we recognize the nuances of an issue, it's not a failure, it's a success. When we recognize the complexities of an issue, it's a win. And when we use evidence to guide our decisions, we know that we are making progress. And yet, our governor and his team deemed the work of the redistricting task force a failure, claiming that the task force had given up. This narrative that he is spinning is misleading. He says that the task force failed, but we know that they weighed the evidence, just like my students do, and they proposed meaningful solutions to fit our unique context. They listened to more than 5,000 Vermonters, and they grounded their solutions in the evidence that would offer real savings without dismantling our entire education system. He says that Vermonters are resistant to change, but we know as teachers, we are always evolving, adapting to our environment to do what is best for our students. Ask any teacher, change is inherent in our jobs. He says that too many Vermonters are nostalgic for the way things used to be, but we know that community members are asking for real tax savings, and if we're going to make substantial changes to our education system, we need to know they will work. Show me the receipts, as my students say. The reality is that teachers across our brave little state want to strengthen public education, and these two bills do just that. Right now, our schools are stretched too thin, and it's not fair that schools are sharing nurses, that there is a month-long wait list to see a mental health clinician, and that there are fewer interventionists, coaches, and electives that exist for children across our state. We're all ready to roll up our sleeves and do this hard work to figure out a way to sustainably fund our public schools. Community members want real savings. Students want community schools where they feel safe and where they feel a sense of belonging. And us teachers, we want what we always want. We want what is best for kids. We want fully funded public schools that support the diverse needs of our students. I'm proud to stand here and support these two bills that directs the state to listen to the evidence-based recommendations from the task force and to give our community members, our students, and our teachers what they desperately want, high-quality public schools that serve the needs of all students. Thank you.
Great. Next up is Robert Carpenter, the school board chair of the Essex Westford School District.
Good afternoon. To give a little bit of history, in 2017, Governor Scott pushed a state-run health benefit plan for school employees. He promised that it would save taxpayers up to $26 million per year and lead to improved educational outcomes. We all know that that failed. Premiums since have raised 113% and are one of the primary cost drivers of the educational funding crisis. This is just one of the many examples of failed legislative promises that have happened along the way, most recently now being Act 73. Things have gotten worse, they have not gotten better. For my district, that healthcare bill, that produced over $8 million in healthcare premium increases. And in the last 2 years, we've lost a school, we've reduced over 100 staff members, all while watching the governor and others point fingers and blame local districts. We feel the anger and the pain of community members, while the decision makers here in the Golden Dome are insulated and looking more and more out of touch. Every step of education reform in recent years has been short-sighted, poorly implemented, prioritizing perceived political victories, not providing sustainable long-term transformation that actually serves taxpayers or kids. Act 73 took a mechanism that requires incredible amounts of nuanced work and gutted it. A foundation formula could have been a real solution, but it requests the investment and work to be done well. Work that the House started, but then was mostly thrown out. Instead, the legislative debate ignored the real cost drivers, and the final legislation was rushed and hacked with zero evidence backing. There are many flaws in the current foundation formula, but I would implore you to just look at one critical piece with me today, and that is around special education, because it is decimated in this formula. Take my own district as an example. We are the second largest school district in Vermont that serves some of the highest number of special needs learners. We will be underfunded by $6 million in special education. To maintain special ed in our district would require $6 million in cuts somewhere else. Now here's the catch. If we don't fund that $6 million gap, we would then become ineligible for federal funding for special education students, which would mean another $1.4 million of critically needed funding for vulnerable students gone. For us to fill this $6 million gap, that could be another 100 staff, losing another building with nowhere else to put kids, losing transportation, and many more cuts. This crisis scenario will play out in every school district in Vermont. This new funding system creates a competition between general education spending and special ed spending, making districts choose between which students receive the resources. If you think that sounds disturbing, it gets worse. The formula attaches a dollar to diagnosis. And here's what this means. It reduces students and the cost to educate them down to which diagnosis is on their IEP, without considering all the intersectional factors that impact what is needed to educate a child. When you systematically harm public education over 10 years, then underfund special ed, it highlights the extreme to which you force districts to determine which students receive resources and who goes without. When you look closely, underfunding special ed often looks like educational eugenics. And this is just one example of the massive errors in the current foundation formula as it stands. Consider other critical issues, such as transportation costs, capital improvement of our aging buildings, and debt services. Not a single one of those things is addressed in the new foundation formula. But guess what? We as schools still have to fund that. Our taxpayers still have to fund that. So that means cuts from other places that are not going to go to educate kids. So let me be clear. There is no factual and honest way to claim that the current foundation formula is equitable. It will not save money. It will not improve educational outcomes, but we know it will harm students. In the past, when legislative promises failed, we were told that the harm was an unforeseen outcome. Is this really unforeseen when the evidence is right there in front of us that students will be harmed? For example, many pointed out that reasonable district consolidation might save money, but the reality is that cost savings max out at district sizes of 2,000 to 3,000 students. The task force had the integrity to do the work and confirm this. Yet, we are still looking at maps that would create districts 3 times the optimal size and cost more to run and harm outcomes. This is the same story over and over again, ignoring facts and bulldozing data. We, as school boards, as community members, as Vermonters, are so tired of hearing we had to do something. Throwing gas on the fire is doing something, but it doesn't help Vermonters from getting burned. I call upon our leaders to have the political courage to go back to the work table, repeal harmful legislation, and do the work, just like we ask our students to do. And in this case, it's accounting for the actual cost drivers of health insurance, accounting for the transportation needs that are not included in that foundation formula so our students can get to school, accounting for the crumbling infrastructure in the buildings that they need to be able to learn in, and especially not putting the burden and pain of legislative failure on the backs of children with special needs. What are we doing if we do that? I believe that if our leaders prioritize that work that was started in the House last year over political expedience, it is possible to start building systems that will actually deliver on the last decade of promises. We are here and willing to do this with you, but we don't want to be here for the next 10 years saying, there's a problem, how do we fix it? Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Heather Thomas, the director of the Vermont Progressive Party.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to deliver some remarks from our party chair, Bill Hunsinger. He could not be here today. So Bill says he's grateful to call the little rural town of Ripton his home. Many of you have heard about his community struggles in the past few years in keeping the elementary school open. Up against a regional school district that was consistently changing its own rules and policies to ensure Ripton School would close, they voted to leave the school district and create their own. The State Board of Education refused to allow them to open their own school district, again changing rules and policies to ensure they could not meet the standards they were setting. The Board of Education gave an ultimatum: rejoin Addison County School District or be essentially unincorporated. This would mean parents would be solely responsible for funding the education of their children. Scared, bruised, and defeated, they voted to rejoin the school district. Then this past summer, the Addison County School District announced Ripton Elementary School, their elementary school, would be closed for the foreseeable future and began the legal process of permanently closing the little rural school. Their community has fought for so long, but can't keep fighting anymore. They've lost. They have been defeated by policies and procedures created by people that will never feel the impacts of what they have done. They have lost the school and all it represents. They are also losing their sense of community and rural life. They will be dealing with this loss for years to come. Ripton Elementary School may be one of the first to fall, but not be the last. Act 73 will ensure communities just like Ripton, those small and vibrant little communities all across this great state, will be shuttered. Rural communities will be dealing with these impacts for years, if not decades. Families will leave. Our little local economies will fail. The rural communities that make Vermont great, the communities that make Vermont will slowly fade away. We cannot give up on Vermont's children, not just for their futures, but for our community's futures. Our collective hope is not lost. What the progressive lawmakers are proposing today will stop the harmful, drastic effects of Act 73. What they are proposing is a chance to deal directly with the problems that we face as a state without sacrificing our children's futures, without taking our state's sense of character away. What they are proposing is a common sense approach that every Vermonter, regardless of political identity, can so easily see is the right choice for Vermont. In this time of partisan rhetoric and divisiveness, these bills are not just good legislation, but a great example of how Vermonters deal with the issues that lay before us all, with a common sense approach that benefits every person that calls our brave little state home. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Bill. And our final speaker is Senator Tanya Piechowski.
Hello, and thank you. It feels like I'm speaking at an awful lot of press conferences this year. I want to speak a little bit to the process by which Act 73 came into law. I remember sitting on the Senate floor as the bill was sent back to committee, stripped down to nothing, returned to the Senate floor to be written in a few days on the floor by amendment, and then in the shadows by two or three people without any knowledge of what was going on. And after about 48 hours, what was delivered to us was over 160 pages that none of us had had time to read, none of us had had time to fully understand, had taken no testimony, had gotten no joint fiscal impact input, had used no data, and simply was pushed forward into conference committee. And in the conference committee, we all got to see play out a partisan battle against private schools and public schools, a battle that disregarded the evidence, a battle that brought in information that had been left on the committee cutting room floor back to the conference report, which is in fact against our rules. I actually rose on the floor and challenged that report in that it was so far out of the bounds of the Senate rules that we should not vote on it. And I won that challenge. I was told that I was right. This conference report was so far out of the bounds that it shouldn't be voted on. But any Senate rule can be overridden by a vote of 2/3 of the senators in the chamber. And that is what happened. 2/3 of the senators said, no, we should just vote on it anyways, in spite of the fact that it's been acknowledged that this is bad process, maybe bad policy, but we don't know, we're going to vote on it anyways. And that is how we came to Act 73. And in spending time reading it, there are some good aspects of it. And our bill to repeal most of it tries to keep what we can of those good aspects. But it tries to get rid of the things that are the most harmful, the least researched, the things that we don't know the impact of. You see, Act 73 has a contingency that the foundation formula doesn't go into effect unless we have new districts. But we have no idea what those districts will be, and no idea how the foundation formula will impact those districts. Some folks likened the process to building a plane while we're flying it. I would actually liken the process to building some sort of craft while we're doing something with it, because I don't know, are we flying it? Is it a plane? Is it a ship? Is it a rocket? I don't know. And to me, that is bad policy. Not necessarily because of the impacts, because that is not responsible policymaking. It is certainly not responsible policymaking with the largest thing state government does, which is educate our children. It is certainly not responsible policy when we are talking about the very foundation of our democracy. Our public education system is the spine of our democracy, and our democracy is under attack. Now is not the time to dismantle our public education system. A public education system that currently has the most progressive way in the country of allocating funds. What we need to do is create the most progressive way in the country of raising those funds. We need to move away from a property-based system that overburdens the bottom 2/3 of earners in our state, while the top 1/3 pays a fraction of a percentage of their incomes. We need to move towards income-based education funding and eliminate the primary education property tax. Now, that does not mean that second homes and businesses and corporations can't still pay into that system, but what it means is that the roof over your head will not be how you pay your education taxes. An income-based system would be more responsive to changes in income, whether you retire or have an injury that puts you on disability. No more would you have to wait a full year for a rebate from the taxes you paid the year before. It would be responsive now, and it would be more fair. And over 10 years ago, when this concept was viewed, the Joint Fiscal Office predicted that it would raise an additional $90 million for the education fund. And given that wealth inequality and the wealthiest in Vermont have gotten wealthier in those 10 years, I would go out on a limb and say that number is higher now. Having worked in our schools as a school clinician, our schools are not over-resourced. Our schools are not exorbitantly spending. Our schools are doing everything they can to piecemeal together while teachers bring their own materials from home to stock their classrooms. And school clinicians are buying students lunch because they don't have the money to do so themselves. Our schools are doing the best they can in incredibly difficult situations. And I want to thank our school heroes, our teachers, our school board members, our school clinicians, our superintendents, the people who are on the front lines of this fight, a fight for democracy, a fight for our children, a fight for our future. We can do better. There are things we can do to rein in cost. We can stop sending public money to out-of-state boarding schools. We can stop sending public money at higher rates to private schools than their students do. We can rein in, perhaps, administrative costs and some of the shared expenditures that are suggested in the well-researched, well-evidenced task force recommendations, which are incorporated into our repeal bill. There are things we can do to rein in spending, but what is far more important is that we move towards revenue generation that is progressive and is responsive to the needs of Vermonters, to the needs of our students, to the needs of our educators. And moving governance into an agency of education that has been systematically gutted by this administration, that has installed unqualified leadership that consistently blames our teachers, blames our students, and blames our communities for our policy failings, all while providing inaccurate data to our schools, is not the way to go. We can do better. We can respond in a way that protects our public schools and creates tax fairness, and tax savings to the Vermonters who need it, and not more tax breaks to the wealthy who are getting plenty from our federal government. So I want to thank you for standing today with our public schools, with our democracy, and with every one of our Vermont communities who is doing the best they can under incredibly difficult circumstances. I hope that we can move forward with evidence-based research solutions that work for students, work for our property taxpayers, and work for all of us. I think I was the last speaker, so if anyone has questions, I know there's a bunch of people pulled in a bunch of directions, but I think everyone would be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Any idea who's going to run for governor on this topic?
I have no idea. That is above my pay grade.
Yeah. Great question.
There's a lot we have to work on before we worry about the governor, though. So I think a lot of us are focused on solving problems, but I do think that the community should be thinking about that, and the community should be, engaging with electeds around that, instead of it being like electeds plotting with electeds about who's next in line, because that happens too much in this building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that one of the only two major political parties in the state would mount an effective, powerful campaign using this as an opportunity to really, mount a strong opposition and not just wait?
It is certainly an opportunity to put forward a very different vision, and it's certainly an issue that I know is on nearly every Vermonter's mind. Last year I heard a lot about property taxes, and this year I've heard far more about the concern of the gutting of our public education system. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for standing up for public education, and yeah.